This is the photo they did not want widely seen. 5 corporate emblems, 5 American heavyweights, their signage removed from skyscrapers in Houston and Detroit and Charlotte, now being fastened onto polished new headquarters in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. As of 6 a.m. Eastern Time this Wednesday, February 25, 2026, the biggest corporate migration in North American history has officially begun. For the first time since the War of 1812, a measurable share of American economic strength is physically shifting across the northern border. And this time, no bullets were fired. The firms chose to move on their own. We are talking about $78 billion in total market value. We are talking about 43,000 American jobs. We are talking about 5 Fortune 500 corporations that examined the United States, the largest economy in the world, and decided they would rather operate from Canada. This is not merely a change of address. It is a rejection, and it unfolded faster than almost anyone predicted. President Trump, already dealing with the Japan bond turmoil, collapsing polls, and a constitutional clash with New York State over his personal assets, woke up to what aides are calling the worst economic headline of his presidency. Inside the White House, officials describe a sense of alarm. Sources say the president is pressing for emergency executive actions to halt the departures, considering use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to freeze corporate assets, and confronting his trade advisors over tariffs that were meant to bring companies back, not push them north. In this report, we will detail which corporations are relocating and the reasons behind it. We will break down how a corporate inversion exodus functions financially. We will outline how Canada structured what critics call the most aggressive economic recruitment campaign since OPEC. And we will confront the question many in Washington avoid. Is this the start of a decline in American economic dominance? To understand why 5 chief executives made one of the boldest moves in modern corporate history this week, you have to look back 18 months. It begins with tariffs. In late 2025, the Trump administration imposed sweeping 25% duties on Canadian imports, covering lumber, aluminum, auto parts, and more. The stated aim was to penalize what the president described as unfair trade behavior and to force renegotiation of the USMCA. What the administration did not foresee was Canada's response. Canada did not concede. Canada retaliated. And then Canada began actively recruiting. According to documents reported by the Financial Times, the Canadian government launched a confidential initiative known as Project Magnet. Starting in September 2025, a program coordinated by Innovation Canada and the Department of Finance presented major incentives to American corporations willing to shift headquarters north of the border. The offer included a 12.5% corporate tax rate for 10 years, compared with an effective 21% in the United States. It included tariff-free access to the European Union through Canada's CETA agreement. It included expedited visas for up to 5,000 employees per company and subsidized commercial property in designated economic zones in Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Calgary, and Ottawa. Calgary. Sources within Canada's finance ministry say the combined value of tax breaks, grants, and infrastructure support exceeded $14 billion. This was not casual outreach. It was a strategic recruitment drive aimed at vulnerabilities created by American trade policy. Now consider the companies involved. First, Stellantis North America. Frustrated by 25% tariffs on Canadian-made parts feeding its Detroit lines, the automaker announced it would relocate its North American headquarters from Auburn Hills, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, directly across the river. The move impacts 8,200 jobs and roughly $19 billion in market value. Executives reportedly calculated that staying would cost $2.3 billion annually in duties, while moving could save $1.8 billion and provide EU access. Second, Dow Chemical, based in Midland, Michigan, is shifting to Sarnia, Ontario, near Port Huron. Its tariff exposure was estimated at $740 million annually on cross-border shipments. Canada offered a specialized processing corridor and subsidized energy through Ontario Hydro. The relocation affects 6,400 jobs and about $38 billion in market capitalization. A source told Reuters the board's decision was unanimous, citing what they described as a hostile regulatory and tariff climate for chemical manufacturing. Third, Magna International's U.S. division is consolidating operations back into Aurora, Ontario, pulling 11,000 American employees across the border and shifting about $9 billion in activity. Fourth, Nutrien, the largest fertilizer producer globally, is transferring its U.S. hub from Deerfield, Illinois to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, moving 4,200 jobs and around $7 billion in related operations. Fifth, Brookfield Asset Management is relocating its New York City office back to Toronto, returning oversight of $5 billion in assets to Bay Street. 5 companies, 5 departures, 5 gaps in the American economic landscape. Yet these may only be the opening wave. A confidential U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey reported by Bloomberg indicates 23 additional Fortune 500 firms are studying relocation options. Automotive, aerospace, pharmaceuticals, and agribusiness sectors are all evaluating Canada, Mexico, and Europe. CEO confidence in U.S. trade policy has reportedly dropped to 22%, the lowest since tracking began in 1987. When a company of this size moves its headquarters, it restructures subsidiaries, holding entities, and intellectual property under new national law. Transfer pricing shifts. Profits once taxed at 21% in the United States become taxable at 12.5% in Canada. A preliminary Congressional Budget Office estimate projects $12.4 billion in annual federal tax revenue loss across the 5 relocations. That affects funding for Social Security, Medicare, and defense. The secondary impact may be greater. Midland, Michigan, population 42,000, depends heavily on Dow as employer and taxpayer. County officials project a 34% drop in property tax revenue within 18 months. Schools, hospitals, and small businesses could feel immediate strain. Similar patterns are expected in Auburn Hills and Deerfield. The Brookings Institution estimates total secondary economic effects above $131 billion when accounting for supply chains, consumer spending, and property values. There are also national security considerations. Dow produces chemicals used in defense applications. Stellantis holds military vehicle contracts. Nutrien controls 22% of North American fertilizer supply. When headquarters and strategic decisions move to Canada, oversight shifts to Canadian regulators and courts. A leaked Pentagon memo reportedly calls the Dow relocation a potential vulnerability within the defense industrial base requiring review. Within the White House, sources say an emergency National Economic Council meeting began at 4 a.m. and lasted 3 hours. The president is said to have asked attorneys to explore legal pathways to stop relocations, including potential use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Legal scholars argue that corporate moves to Canada do not meet the statutory threshold of an extraordinary national threat. Still, discussions are ongoing. Markets are already under pressure. The Japan bond crisis triggered global risk repricing. U.S. borrowing costs jumped 180 basis points in 2 weeks. Canada's central bank cut rates by 50 basis points in January, widening the gap. Combined with tax incentives, that created a powerful financial pull. For companies like Dow, projected 5-year savings could exceed $9 billion. Goldman Sachs modeling suggests that if 25 to 30 Fortune 500 companies relocate, federal tax revenue could drop $48 billion annually, state revenues $122 billion, and the S&P 500 could fall 15% over 6 months. Retirement accounts and pension funds would absorb further losses. On Wall Street, a phrase circulates: capital follows math. From Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney views this as a strategic win. A former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, Carney reportedly designed Project Magnet to capitalize on tariff-driven disparities. Canadian officials say they did not take companies. They offered alternatives. Chinese state media has highlighted the exodus, framing it as evidence of instability in U.S. economic policy. Meanwhile, Trump's political base appears divided. Some see corporate betrayal. Others see broken promises as jobs leave despite pledges to restore them. The coalition that powered the 2024 victory now faces strain. History shows that once capital begins to relocate, reversal is difficult. Britain faced similar shifts in the 18th century. The United States experienced manufacturing flight in the late 20th century. Ireland's tax strategy drew pharmaceutical giants in the 2000s. Economic gravity favors the most competitive environment. As Thursday approaches, attention turns to potential executive orders, market reactions, and Canada's next moves. Prime Minister Carney is scheduled to address Parliament at 3 p.m. EST, with reports suggesting a second phase of Project Magnet targeting American technology firms. If major tech companies consider relocation, the current $78 billion shift may be only the beginning. For the 43,000 workers affected, the trucks are already moving. For millions more, uncertainty is growing. Tariffs intended to protect domestic jobs may have created incentives to leave. The balance of economic power is being redrawn in real time, and the outcome remains uncertain. Sometimes empires do not fall to invasion. Sometimes they relocate.